All right, good evening from DC and good morning from Australia. This is Jeff Payne from the NESA Center with another iteration of the Indian Ocean Maritime Series. Today I'm joined by Dr. David Brewster, who's affiliated with the Australian National University, does all sorts of work for the Australian government, is a very active scholar in various aspects of Indian Ocean region issues. One of the issues that he has been focused on over the past several years has been environmental concerns in the wider Indian Ocean rim. And so he joins us today to give his thoughts about A, what are some of these challenges, and B, what are some of the ways to address these challenges. So we're going to kick off with a question, Doctor. And the question is this. What is the starting point for gaining momentum towards cooperative action to address environmental degradation in the Indian Ocean region?
Okay, thanks. I'm glad. Thanks, Jeff, for starting with such an easy question. Look, I suppose let me just back up a little bit. I've been working in this field for 10 or 15 years now on Indian Ocean security, and I think it's increasingly clear that for many, if not most, Indian Ocean states, that environmental security threats are the most important threats that they face. In terms of their own priorities, it's far above issues relating to major power competition. And so, and in some cases, obviously, for the small island states, climate change represents an existential threat. So, it's no use for us to be going and talking about major power competition when they want to talk about their own continued existence. So clearly, it's of great importance to them. It's a key facet if we want to engage with them, if we want to bring them into the family, if you like, then we have to be talking their language. And Australia is facing very similar issues among the Pacific Island states that, we will express concerns about some late, recent Chinese actions, and they'll say, yeah, but what about climate change, etc. So that's, I suppose, the background for it. The Indian Ocean is far less organized than the Pacific. Historically and now, and there's not a range of strong regional organizations as you have in the Pacific that would provide easy platforms to undertake these sorts of initiatives. The only two pan-Indian Ocean organizations, the Indian Ocean Rim Association and the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, aren't really, I don't think, the best platforms to be using in terms of regional engagement on environmental security issues. One platform that we have been looking at recently or one initiative is Indo-PACOM's Pacific Environmental Security Partnership, which has been going on for around 10 years now, and quite successful in bringing together or starting with military to military engagement and extending that out to military and civil engagement. And the question is, and I think so that there's a lot of good lessons from that initiative, and the question is, how do you translate those sorts of lessons into the Indian Ocean? And it is more difficult. There are a greater range of players in the Indian Ocean region that you need to wrangle in. And certainly what we have been thinking about at the National Security College in Canberra is starting with engaging among the three key states with capabilities and interests in the Indian Ocean, that being Australia, France, and India. And it's there's been some talk for some years about those three countries working much more closely together. But the thinking is that it shouldn't just be confined to those three states, that it would be potentially a very interesting initiative of the Quad Plus, being Australia, France, India, United States, and Japan, and it could potentially be a concrete, success story for the Quad Plus in the Indian Ocean. So that's where the thinking has gotten to at the moment.
Your point about climate change is well taken, given especially what's going on, what Australia has dealt with in the past year, and then obviously what the United States right now is dealing with. The southern part of the United States is biblically being flooded by continuous tropical storms, and then the West Coast is, in essence, burning. But there's a lot of territory both Australia and the United States have, and so when you're talking about these smaller states, geographically, one crisis can be, a calamity beyond kind of, the ability to process it. So how does, we all get the importance of climate change, we all get why it matters, but two interrelated questions. One, security professionals will say, well, environmental stuff is just like humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. So can you get into how those two ideas, environmental advocacy, protection, preparedness, response, is distinct from traditional humanitarian assistance, disaster relief? And then two, in relationship to the Indian Ocean, is the goal to make it content driven, or to cover as much geographic area as possible? I guess another way of putting it is, could this Quad Plus idea, using a model that has been used in the Pacific, if it focused on, say, the island states of, say, Mauritius, Comoros, Madagascar, if the success story was there and it expanded outwards, that would be a win? Or is it more, you want to start thinking comprehensively from the start about the entire Indian Ocean rim? So back to you. Sorry, I know that those are not easy questions either.
Okay, first question is, should we see environmental security threats in the same basket as HADR, as a sort of a soft security issue? I would say no, very strongly no, and the reason is that these threats are, for many states, existential and virtually existential. We're not just talking about a one-off cyclone where you fly in some food, etc. They, as we know, some of these island states in particular, they are facing the end of their existence as a country. And for others, for example, if they lose their fishing industry, they will, and or maritime tourism industries, they will lose virtually all of their national incomes. So it's the significance of these threats to these states mean that we have to address them seriously as an ongoing matter, not just a one-off. Here is a plane load full of food, and these threats tend to feed into traditional security threats and major power competition. And there's a few very interesting examples that I could give. Somali-based piracy. If you track back the reasons why that piracy began, it began in the 1990s with the collapse of the Somali state, the collapse of law enforcement mechanisms, and the collapse of any ability to enforce their maritime zones. That led to the entrance of many illegal fishers, mostly European, to completely fish out the Somali waters. The Somali fishermen lost their complete livelihoods, turned to piracy, and we know what happened then. The international response included bringing in navies from all over the world, including the Chinese Navy. 10 years later, the Chinese Navy needs a local logistical facility, and there we have a Chinese naval base sitting in Djibouti because of illegal fishing. So we can't just try and ring fence these issues and just call them nice, interesting, soft security issues. They can have a major geopolitical impact. Another example, which is a little bit off point, it's not, but it demonstrates some of the unexpected consequences, is the 2004 tsunami. So that, as many of us will know, that was the epicenter of that tsunami was off the coast of Indonesia, of Aceh province in Indonesia, impacted many countries right around the Indian Ocean, principally, or Indonesia was the worst hit, but also Sri Lanka was also badly hit. At that time, there were two active civil conflicts occurring in Aceh, Indonesia, and also in Sri Lanka. And the tsunami and the devastation and the deaths of many hundreds of thousands of people coming from the tsunami affected those civil conflicts in very different ways. In Aceh, it effectively snuffed out the separatist insurgency that was happening there. The simple destruction of life meant that there was an immediate ceasefire and a negotiated solution to that long-running separatist insurgency in Aceh province. Over on the other side of the Bengal, in Sri Lanka, the Tamil Tigers were able to use the disaster and all of the aid that was flowing in as part of that disaster in a very different way to effectively impose a tax on any incoming aid. It enriched itself, and that actually funded the reignition of the civil conflict, the long-standing civil conflict in Sri Lanka. So we see these this natural event having an immediate impact on traditional security issues, but in very different and somewhat unexpected ways. And I should add a third impact of that tsunami was it bringing together the navies of India, United States, Japan, and Australia, the precursors of the Quad grouping. And so that had fast forward 15, 16 years later, that had another major geopolitical impact on the region. So to cut a long story short, we simply can't, these environmental security threats are so significant to many countries that we can't just put them in the soft category, and they can have very large and quite unexpected geopolitical impact.
That's great. Incredibly well said. You don't have to evangelize with me about the importance of these things, but I'm glad that you put it far better than I could. So, to kind of wrap up this brief conversation, which I'm sure we'll have more in the future, a simple policy-minded question, because a lot of the audience who watches these videos are those involved in navies, coast guards, maritime constabulary forces throughout the Indian Ocean, Europe, Asia, and also in the United States. For them, for that kind of audience, what is something related to taking the right step forward when it comes to gaining a grasp on environmental security in the Indian Ocean? Like, is it rethinking certain aspects like maritime domain awareness, like rethinking how you imagine that? Is it factoring them into how you do specific type of training? Is it, how does this start for these people? Is it a tactical thing? Is it an operational? Is it a strategic change? What are your thoughts there on how to kind of create the right mindset to approach these topics?
Yeah, look, I think we need to change our own mindset in engaging with countries in the region. We both Americans and Australians come at it from a very much a geopolitical standpoint. We're concerned about Chinese influence, whether it be economic or military, and we want to engage with local states on those questions. We need to be very much hooked into the mindset of what are their concerns. And very often the answers that local states are looking for are relatively easy. It's not about giving them some fancy equipment that will soon be rusting, a ship or a radar or something that will soon be rusting away and unused. Very often, what we can offer these countries is our experience in putting together systems, in getting the military and civil agencies to work together, for example, in an environmental response, responding to an oil spill, for example. And I think a great example is in maritime domain awareness. The greatest step forward that one can make with many countries in terms of improving their MDA is not to give them equipment, but to sit down and talk about our experience in bringing together all of the agencies of government and all of the information that they have in the maritime domain, and how that information can be fused and analysed and understood and then acted upon. And that sort of understanding, I think, by coming from an external country, whether it be Australia or the United States or another, I think can be quite profound. And for example, Australia has run some interesting programs in the Indian Ocean on search and rescue, and that did not involve giving them equipment. It involved sitting down and talking about establishing a single point of national contact for search and rescue, to which various agencies report, and that coordinates the search and rescue operations. And that has had really quite a significant impact on the effectiveness of the search and rescue capabilities of many countries. I think that's an important lesson in what the sort of assistance we can provide in dealing with various environmental security threats.
That's incredibly well said, and my experience as well. So I'm not going to add anything to that other than I think that's spot on. I agree completely that in fact, to put it in a sloganistic way, which those of us who work in the DoD love, you can talk about China or Russia or Iran, for that matter, without actually talking about Russia, China, or Iran. And so I think that should be the mantra to a certain degree. Yes, but anyway, thank you so much, David, for carving out time. We'll see you again in the future, I'm sure, and I'm sure people will have follow-up questions to you. So thanks again.
Great. Okay. Great. Lovely to talk. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.